of my favorite videos to make here on my channel is where I pick a number of watches that I think are really underrated, that sell for a great price and are from luxury brands. And today we're doing one of those videos. However, there's a little bit of a twist. Some of these watches are vintage, but we'll go through each one of them and talk about them in detail. Actually, one of the watches I'm going to be talking about today is one of the watches on my wrist. I'll be doing a full review of this watch, but definitely stay tuned towards the end of this video for details on this watch. It's my most recent purchase because I really cannot pass up some of these bargains. So without further ado, let's talk about my first choice. What if I told you that there was a gold Vacheron, a two-tone Vacheron on a bracelet that sold for around $4,000? A lot of people would tell me that I'm crazy, but there is a Harmony from the 1970s and 1980s that sells very regularly on eBay for under $4,000, depending on if it has a bracelet or not. If it doesn't, it usually sells around $2,000, and they go up from there. For around $4,000, you can get a very nice Harmony, which is a rectangular tank style Vacheron from the 1970s and 80s with a gold bracelet. So these are not solid gold, they are two-tone and they are bars of gold. So on the back of these bracelets, they aren't gold, they are stainless steel, but on the front, these appear to be basically gold watches. So there is a lot of gold going into these. These are not technically a plated watch, they are really just a layered watch. So it's layered stainless steel and gold. But I have to say, I think these are pretty cool, and I think they're kind of in style right now. When you think about what Piaget are doing, and they are re-releasing these integrated bracelet watches from the 1970s, this is essentially an integrated bracelet tank style watch from the 1970s. That's gold, that's thin, and also not all that small. These are around 22 millimeters. They go up to around 24 or 25 millimeters, depending on the version. So one is a ladies version, one is a men's version. That men's version, that larger version, isn't a tiny watch. Yes, it is a small watch, but it's on a bracelet, so it does wear larger. And if you've seen these on anybody's wrist, you probably haven't because they are very rare. They are good looking and they do wear larger than their dimensions. Imagine owning a watch from the Holy Trinity that basically looks like a gold watch for under $4,000. There was one that just recently sold on eBay for under $3,500. I don't know what it actually sold for because there was a make an offer on it. I did put this into my cart and I was eventually offered around, I think the price was around $2,999. So I would imagine it sold less than $3,000 on a bracelet, and it would fit almost a 7-inch wrist. And that's the reason why I didn't buy it, because it didn't fit my wrist. If it did, I would have bought this watch. Unfortunately, it didn't, so there you go. If you love the watches that I talk about here on my channel, you're really going to love the website that I'm about to tell you about. It's called Wristrebels. Wristrebels is a website that has all of those small micro brands and independent brands that are really hard to find, all in one place. Brands like Seiko Design, Mon, Formex, Awake, and Beau Blue, and many other brands you won't find anywhere else. Definitely check out Wristrebels at wristrebels.com. Also check out their Instagram at Wristrebels, and if you end up buying something, tell them that Watch Chris sent you. Everybody knows the Breguet Type 20. The Type 20 was a military watch. It was issued in the 1950s for the French military. They had a flyback chronograph, which was extremely important. They had a dual register layout. That flyback chronograph allowed pilots to reset and restart the timer with a single press of a button, which was very important for timing things like dropping bombs. While the military issued watches were marked the Type 20, the civilian versions starting in around 1955 were marked the Type XX. These were the ones that were made for civilians. So if you were not in the military and you wanted one of these beautiful chronographs, you could now buy one. But something that a lot of people don't know is that Breguet wasn't the only manufacturer that had this Type 20 chronograph contract with the French military. Dodane was another brand that had the Type 20, and they made the Type 20 along with Aran and Chronofix. So I believe it was Dodane who actually made it for those two other brands, and they were marketed as Aran separately from Dodane and Chronofix. Mathé Tissot was another watch brand that made the Type 20. Those sell for a lot more money than the other brands that I'm talking about in this video, so I would leave the Mathé Tissot and the Breguet Type 20 to the side because those do sell for significant amounts of money on the secondary market. But if you want a Type 20, a real Type 20 that is basically the same spec as a Breguet Type 20, then take a look at Dodane, take a look at Aran, and take a look at Chronofix. There are plenty of these that sell on eBay on a very regular basis. They are powered by Valjoux 22s, 222s, and 225s. These are really reliable and back then very high grade movements. So if you need servicing for them, they're actually not that hard to service because there are plenty of parts out there. There were tons of watches using these movements during that time, so there are plenty of spare parts out there. Now, prices on these do have a very large range. However, they are pretty affordable. You can get ones in rough condition for around $2,000, and I have seen those sell on eBay on a regular basis, and it depends on the name. So if you want a Dodane, those are actually a little bit less expensive. If you want a Chronofix, they're a little bit more expensive in my experience and what I have seen. Obviously, Mathé Tissot are more expensive than those. And then, of course, the Breguets are at the top end of this list. But starting at around $2,000 for rough examples and going to around $5,000 for very clean examples that are working and have a very clean case and dial. That's pretty incredible for the amount of history that these watches have. The fact that they were basically a clone of the Breguet Type 20 because they were made to the exact same spec. Very cool watches, very good looking watches in my opinion. Obviously they're not the same as the Breguet because they were made in a different factory, but very cool watches with lots of history. Speaking of watches with lots of history, the watch that I'm going to talk about next is a watch that I bought and sold. And I sold it because I ended up buying a 50 Fathoms. This is a 1960s Waltham that was made by Blancpain, and it's a Bathyscaphe. This has to be one of the best looking Bathyscaphes that they've made. And also, these are in a somewhat modern size. They're around 38 millimeters. The one that I had was in excellent condition, and it had a beautiful silver dial, which again is not very typical for a 50 Fathoms. So these are technically a Bathyscaphe, not a 50 Fathoms, but those two lines of watches in the Blancpain lineup of watches currently are kind of commingled. So they are technically a 50 Fathoms if you really go by today's standard. Back then, these were pedestrian dive watches. They made them for civilians, not for the military, and that was kind of the whole point. Waltham was going out of business, and they weren't really selling many watches. I believe they were absorbed by a Swiss brand, and then eventually they went out of business. But before they did, they made some of these watches. They were around a 38, 37 millimeter case. They wore really nicely on your wrist because they did wear slightly larger than that because they had these very long lugs. Tritium lume, and you got a Waltham caliber inside. Really, it wasn't a Waltham caliber. I think they said it was the R312. At least that's what mine was. However, this is based on an A shield. Basically the exact same movement that you would find in most 50 Fathoms. I think I paid around $2,600 for the one that I owned, and they still sell for that price today. So if you really want to own a 50 Fathoms, but you don't want to spend a lot of money, this is a Blancpain made watch that has a Waltham name instead of a Blancpain name on the dial. That is really the only difference between the two. And of course, I believe the rotor says Waltham, but it also says Rayville on the rotor itself. So technically, this is a Blancpain. If this watch said Blancpain on the dial, it would cost around $10,000 to $15,000. It doesn't, so it costs around $2,000 to $3,000. The next watch I'm going to talk about is a watch that I love to talk about. It's a watch that nobody knows about. This actually, in most cases, will sell for retail. Sometimes they do sell a little bit less, depending on condition. This is a Seiko, but it's not just any Seiko. This is a watch that came out in the late 90s, I want to say. At least I remember seeing it in the late 90s and early 2000s. It was a watch that was powered by body heat. So essentially this was a quartz watch, but the temperature between your body and the outside area that you were standing in, so the atmosphere, is what powered this watch. It's very complicated, and it was a really ambitious watch that Seiko made, and when they sold it back then, it cost around $2,800. Only 500 of these watches were ever made. They have a very steampunk, very modern design, an integrated bracelet form, and their Seiko code, the string of numbers and letters that it was called, was the SBET001. So the interesting quirks and features of this watch doesn't end with the fact that the movement is powered by the temperature change between your body and the environment that you're in. It was also a perpetual calendar. It had a really cool power reserve function as well that was displayed on the dial. It had a very unique caliber, a caliber that they no longer made. Basically, right after they made this, they never made it again. That was the 6C12. It had a power save function, so it was like a two-stage power save function, and it saved the time, so it would just pop back to life and go directly to the current time. Usually had a few months for that to happen, but that's a pretty cool feature. These were around 42 millimeters, but they wore larger because of the style of case. And these got a sapphire crystal. You know that Seiko thought that these were a high-end watch if they put a sapphire crystal on them. Back then, they didn't put sapphire crystals on almost anything. They put one on this watch back in 1998. That's pretty incredible. By the way, these do sell for around $2,000 to $3,000. That's basically what you would have paid new. But for such a rare, special watch with functionality that you will never find in any other watch, I think that's actually a pretty good price. So that's the reason why I wanted to talk about it in this video. Normally, I actually don't talk about watches like this because I don't think they're discounted enough. But I would say this is special enough to justify paying that price because you're never going to see anybody else wear them. They're very distinct looking as well. So a very cool Seiko that is just very weird. The next watches I want to talk about are the most affordable watches on this list. They are from a brand that is definitely not affordable. Currently, I'm not even sure what the cheapest Credor is, but I believe they start at around $3,000 to $4,000. That is for a very simple quartz Credor. On a strap, nothing extravagant. Today, I'm going to be talking about some tank watches, again, on the smaller side, but there is one particular one that I really love. That is the 2F705500. This is a 23 or 24 millimeter case, so it is on the larger side. Again, if you're talking about like a Cartier tank, those usually are in the range of around 22 to 23 millimeters. So this is slightly larger than those. So this will wear larger. And you have this thick integrated bracelet on it. And that's kind of the reason why I love this watch. Now, I do want to say all of the tanks that I'm talking about, there are gold features. And those gold features are solid 22 karat gold or 18 karat gold, which is kind of cool when you think about it because this is a Credor. So you are getting real gold, not plated gold with these watches. That's something that I think is very interesting. These sell for around $200 to $300 on eBay. Now that 2F705500, the one that I was just talking about, that's around, I think it's around 23 or 24 millimeters. That gets a very interesting bracelet. It's basically a mesh bracelet on the underside, but on the top side, they have flattened that mesh bracelet into a pattern. And that's the only way I could describe it on the bracelet. And it looks like fish scales. But They've also sort of rounded the edges of the bracelet so it doesn't look like a mesh bracelet at all. It looks like an integrated bracelet. It is really interesting and in my opinion, really good looking. Another bargain is the 84206400. These are on the slightly smaller side, but again, these are very Piaget-esque, very Cartier-esque. And these get 22 karat gold. So all those little gold bars between each one of those links, that is a solid piece of 22 karat gold. And you can get this watch for under $300. Now, I bring up these watches because I know there's a trend out there of smaller tank watches that are integrated. So integrated bracelet, tank watches, and two-tone is also coming back. These are fantastic examples of very high-grade watches that you can get for literally next to nothing. Not even one link on the other watches that I just mentioned, like Cartier and Piaget. You can't even get one link for the price of this entire watch. Yes, these are quartz, but they are quartz cool in my opinion. All of these watches sell for under $500. I would give you a little bit of a word of caution. Definitely look at these on eBay. There are plenty of them there. I have been bidding on them for a very long time. There's one thing you have to keep in mind. These are usually located in Japan, so you will be paying tariffs on that. So if you're finding one for around $300, you might end up paying around $400 to $500, depending on what the tariffs are and the shipping costs and all of that stuff. So keep that in mind when you're buying these watches. That's not really a big deterrent for me. If you get one that's a bargain around $200, you're going to be spending around $300 to $350. These are quartz cool and they're also somewhat on trend. Last but not least, and as promised, the watch that I have on my wrist today is a very cool watch from a brand that has gone out of business. However, they are trying to revive this brand and I am very excited about what they may do in the future. It's called Grisogono. Now this was a Italian-Swiss brand. I believe it was Italian, but I know that they were Swiss. I believe they were Italian as well. And they created some incredible watches throughout their history. The watch that I have on my wrist originally retailed for around $18,000. This is the FG1, named for the owner of the brand. This is a very complicated watch that originally sold for a lot of money, but now sells for literally pennies on the dollar. This gets a jump hour mechanism that is retrograde for the minutes and the seconds, and you also get a GMT function. And it doesn't stop there. On that retrograde seconds, which is at the bottom of the dial under a separate sapphire crystal, you also get a very large day-night indicator. It's not something that other brands have done in the past, and you'll see what I'm talking about as I'm showing you video of the watch, but it doesn't stop there. The case is extremely bespoke. You have a very odd case and you have articulating lugs. There are lots of details about this watch that are interesting and things that you would never see from other brands. Why, I don't know. They went out of business. I'm pretty sure it was because of COVID, but it might have happened slightly before COVID. Either way, their watches are on eBay and you can get them starting at around $1,500, going up to tens of thousands of dollars, because some of their watches cost in the $300,000 range. Those were developed fully by Christophe Claret, if you know who he is. Those are some insane watches. They made minute repeaters, digital, mechanical digital watches. One of the first to do it, and that was made completely by Christophe Claret. And then, of course, Ingenieur, a very big participant in making their watches as well. In fact, I believe Ingenieur was the one who made this in collaboration with Christophe Claret. This watch cost $29.95. So $2,995 for a watch that originally cost $18,000. That, I think, is pretty incredible. And also the watchmaking behind this watch, the complications, how good it looks, how unique it is. I think that's a fantastic price, but I will do a full video with tons of macro and I'll get into the details on exactly how this movement works and what I know about this watch, because there really isn't a lot of information. Anyway, guys, Tell me what you guys think down in the comments below about this video. I love doing these videos. I hope you guys enjoy them. Please, if you enjoyed this video, drop a comment down below. Let me know. It really is very encouraging, and I have tons of watches like the ones that I've put into this video today to talk about, so definitely add a comment down below, like this video, and of course, please don't forget to subscribe. It is very helpful, and obviously, I very much appreciate it. That's really it, guys. Thank you for logging on. Thank you for watching this video. I will catch you guys in the next video.